Hello, I'm in England, and I'm going to talk about a strange experience at a sale room when I was a kid. So when I was a child, my father had an antique shop in England, in Warwick, and he would go to sale rooms, and I would go with him when I had the chance. He would ask me to go with him. I used to love going, and I wanted to go, and they were usually weekdays, so they were, when I was young, school holidays. So I went to a sale with him. I was probably 13, and we walked into the sale room, which was Phillips in Knoll, later become Bonhams, Phillips in Knoll near Birmingham, near Warwick, and we went into the octagon, which was a new part of the sale room where the best bits were showed. And my father started rearranging things, and I said, "What are you doing, Dad?" He said, "Well, I'm moving things around." I said, "Why? You can't move things around." He said, "I'm going to move things around because I put some of the stuff in the sale." So I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, some of the things are mine, and I want them in the best places." So he proceeded to then spend 20 minutes walking around the sale room, moving his lots into better positions. For example, in this octagon there was a credenza, and he was selling a clock, and the clock was in the corner, so he put it on the top of the credenza and moved someone else's item into the corner. So this went on for 20 minutes. He went around moving pictures into the better positions and just got on with it. And the sale room didn't really seem to mind, which surprised me. So nowadays I sell in Malta, I sell in England, and I'm aware that in sale rooms there are these hotspots where things get seen better by people viewing sales. It doesn't apply so much to online bidding, of course, but it certainly applies to sale rooms. And if you have a picture in a hotspot, you'll get more money for it. More people will view it if it is located and associated in the proximity of better things. The better dealers, the collectors, will leave bids on it. People don't really want to go to sale room and leave one bid, because if they don't get it, they go away empty-handed and it's a waste of time. So you get this sort of random blunderbuss effect bidding, and so the hotspots in the sale rooms are often well lit, eye-level places near the rostrum for the high-value pictures, and they're in good locations because the sale room doesn't want people to steal them and doesn't want people to fiddle with them and break them and damage them. So the same applies for silver, which used to be and still is shown in showcases. And if my father had some silver, he would get it on the top shelf of the showcase and move it off the bottom shelf and rummage around and rearrange it. So it's a very strange habit, which I didn't like at the time, but now I understand it. And when I put things into sales, I say to the auction owner, "Can you put it in a hotspot?" They know exactly what I'm talking about. So there are hotspots where things sell for more money. And the other thing about why I'm talking about these auctions, there were some tricks of the trade. If you're a dishonest dealer and you want to buy an item at a sale room, in the olden days when everything was not online, you would have the opportunity to spoil items in order to get the price down. So what would happen, for example, with a Georgian bureau, is a dealer would view early in the viewing a Georgian bureau. They would take the key and lock the fall, and they would hide the key in the carcass, press it into a joint, or they'd steal the key, and the next person who viewed this bureau would not be able to open it. And obviously to get a lock changed on the fall of a bureau is hundreds of pounds even in those days. And the sale room wouldn't care, because they wanted to get rid of the damn thing and wanted the commission, so they would just sell it as it is, which was very much their role. And that's what some dealers would do. The other trick was, with a chest of drawers, a chest of drawers has two drawers at the top. Often the dealers would swap the drawers over, and because it's antique and handmade, they wouldn't run. And domestic buyers would be put off by this, who were buying for themselves, non-trade buyers, and they wouldn't buy a chest of drawers where the drawers didn't run, because it would mean they had to send it to a workshop, which would cost a fortune, transport and labour, etc., etc. And apart from the money, it was inconvenient. So people would move drawers, and we were aware that people spoilt things and stole things. If there was a gun in a box, people would steal the ramrod, for example, or they'd hide it. If people were buying a jewellery box with lids, they would put the lids in the wrong places and again dispose of the key or hide the key. So that's what was going on in those days. And if you go to a sale room now in England, keys are nearly always kept behind the counter, because it's become endemic in some of these sale rooms. And obviously silver and valuables are never easy to look at because they're behind glass, because people steal them, especially coins and gold and silver. So it's very interesting. When my father was consigning things to sale rooms in the 70s and 80s, he'd know the auctions, and because he bought a lot of stuff from these sale rooms, they were obliged to look after him. And he'd say to them, "Can you give me a good location?" They'd say, "Okay, Michael." Sometimes he'd say, "Can you give me a free photograph?" And they would say no or yes occasionally, because if in those days everything was in a catalogue. If you had a photograph in the centre of the catalogue, black and white, you would get more bids. If it was on the front cover, you'd get a huge amount more bids. So he'd ask for a good hotspot physically in the sale room. He'd ask for a picture. He'd ask for lots to be divided into lots of different lots rather than sets, because you get more money if things have lots of different lots and are not sold in sets. You get more money usually. And sometimes you'll see in England and Malta people split pairs. Even pairs can be split and sold separately. And he would ask for a discount on the selling commission as well, and he would get a discount on the selling commission usually. If he introduced other people's goods to the sale room would give him some of the seller's commission. So the auctions were really a big part of the business, and my father would buy probably 80% of his stuff at auction, 20% from private vendors who were very much more time consuming and demanding, difficult, and he would sell at auctions. The very good things he bought, he would pass up the food chain to London sale rooms, where the collectors would coalesce and the skilled cataloguers would be able to properly market proper things. I'm talking about guns, instruments, scientific instruments with names on, paintings with signatures of good artists, glass with good names on the bottom, pottery of a good nature. And he would also sell things locally in local sale rooms which he couldn't sell in the shop, not often, because he is parsimonious, still alive. Parsimonious, didn't really like giving the auction houses a fee, but sometimes things would go back into the sale. And the other thing, just in passing while we're talking about auctions, many lots were sold by vendors in the rush, especially deceased estates and bankruptcies, and not so many divorces in the 70s because there weren't many divorces, but increasingly nowadays divorces as well. And people would chuck stuff in boxes, take it to the sale room. The problem is you can't view a box easily in a sale room. There's too many people around, and not all sale rooms want to photograph laboriously each item and put measurements on it and descriptions. So if stuff was in a narrow toolbox, people would look at the top third and then just gamble on the rest of it. So my father would buy all these gambly lots in boxes and would separate the things for the shop which he wanted, and he would then have this residue of junk which he'd re-enter into the sales. So he'd buy 4 lots, take a bit out of each box of the shop and put the rubbish back in the sale room. But he wouldn't put it back in the sale room in a tall box. He'd put it back in the sale room in a tray, which occupied more space and people could see it all. And he'd put like with like, he would put woodware together, brassware together, pewter together, goss or pottery together. And my father's still alive now doing the same thing for fun. Not so much now, but he does it just to occupy himself. So the sale rooms were a big part of the trade, and still a huge part of the trade, hugely enjoyable. Most of the buying now is done online. You can still go to sales, but they're not like they used to be. If you can view sales, you will learn a lot about the stock, you will learn a lot about the trade. You can track what sells, what doesn't sell. You can look at market prices. You can gauge the fashion. Some things come into fashion, everyone wants them. Some things drop out of fashion and people just don't want them. I notice at the moment you can buy really good armour for very little, and guns, old flintlocks, very cheap. They're cheaper than they were 30 years ago. But if you want to buy a mid-century 1950s limited edition print, they're going through the roof. I think it's to do with the fact that people can use these pictures and prints. People obviously can't use the armour decoratively. It's so easy to use them in the modern setting. It's very hard to ship armour and weapons now. There are new restrictions in England on on posting knives and guns. There are new restrictions on animal parts too, generally. And the day is coming when it will be almost impossible to post ivory, and even bull tortoiseshell is on the list. It's going to become difficult to deal in and move tortoiseshell. The shippers won't want to handle it. It costs too much work. Even some exotic timbers are now on the list. You can't move them very easily. You can get exemptions and you can get certificates, but it's paperwork, it's cost, it's time. So taxidermy is another example. Stuffed animals and crocodiles and turtle shells, even coco de mer nutshells are being watched. So the market is changed by law, fashion, and things like that. Okay, I hope I bored you. Thank you.